There's nothing more heartbreaking than watching your child sleep in the backseat of your car because you can't afford rent. For Jace Thomlin, losing his wife to cancer was devastating enough, but losing their home 6 months later left him and his 10-year-old son Ollie with nowhere to turn. With $800 in his pocket, Jace made a desperate choice at a town auction. He bought a house that had been abandoned for 30 years. The neighbors called it cursed. The windows were boarded up and weeds covered the front steps. But when Jace and Ollie walked inside, they found something incredible. The house was perfectly preserved. Child's drawings hung on the walls. Toys sat waiting in corners. A diary lay open on a bedroom desk. It was like the family had just vanished one day, leaving everything behind. As father and son began cleaning their new home, they discovered the house held a secret that would change their lives forever. What had the previous family left behind that was worth more than Jace could ever imagine? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months earlier, Jace Thomlin had been a different man. He'd worn pressed shirts to his job at the county planning office, came home to the smell of Sarah's cooking, and helped 10-year-old Ollie with homework at their kitchen table. Their modest 2-bedroom house on Maple Street had been filled with laughter, Sarah's terrible singing from the shower, and the comfortable chaos of a family that believed tomorrow would always come. Cancer changed everything with the efficiency of a winter storm. Sarah's diagnosis arrived in March, aggressive and unforgiving. By August, she was gone, taking with her not just Jace's heart, but their financial stability. The medical bills came in, Waves insurance covered some, but not the experimental treatments, not the private nurses, not the hope they'd purchased at $30,000 a month until their savings evaporated like morning dew. The foreclosure notice arrived 3 weeks after Sarah's funeral, while Jace was still finding her coffee cups in the sink and her bookmark in novels she'd never finish. He'd stared at the legal document, the words blurring through tears he thought he'd exhausted. Ollie had found him at the kitchen table at midnight, still holding the paper. "Dad." Ollie's voice had been small in the darkness. "Are we going to be okay?" Jace had pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of his hair still, using Sarah's strawberry shampoo because neither of them could bear to change it. "We'll figure it out, buddy." "We always do." But they hadn't figured it out. The house sold at auction for less than they owed. Jace's grief had affected his work performance, and the county's budget cuts gave them an easy excuse to let him go. By November, they were living in Jace's 15-year-old Honda Civic, moving between parking lots and trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Ollie had stopped talking much after they lost the house. The boy who once chatted about everything from baseball cards to why clouds moved had grown quiet and watchful. He did his homework by streetlight, showered at the community center, and never once complained. That silence worried Jace more than any tantrum would have. The Millbrook County Courthouse held auctions every third Thursday, selling properties for back taxes. Jace had been driving past when he saw the crowd gathering. Something desperate made him pull over and walk up the courthouse steps. He'd never attended an auction, but desperation makes teachers of us all. Most of the properties went for thousands, tens of thousands. Jace was about to leave when the auctioneer called out, "Next item, 1,247 Sycamore Street. Been sitting empty for 30 years. Sold as is. No inspections, no warranties. We'll start the bidding at $500. The crowd murmured and shifted. Someone in the back called out, "That's the ghost house. Nobody wants that place." An elderly woman near Jace shook her head. "Shame what happened to that family. Poor little girl." Jace found his hand rising. 500. The auctioneer looked surprised. "I have 500. Do I hear 6? Silence stretched across the courthouse steps. The November wind rattled the oak trees, sending brown leaves skittering across the pavement. Jace could feel eyes on him, could hear whispered conversations about the fool bidding on a cursed house. 600, came a voice from the crowd. Jace's heart hammered. 600 would leave him with $200 to his name. But Ollie needed a roof, needed an address for school, needed something stable in a world that had taken everything else away. 700, Jace called out. More silence. The other bidder shook his head and walked away. 800, Jace heard himself say, though no one had bid against him. The auctioneer banged his gavel. Sold to the gentleman in the blue jacket for $800. Later, driving through Millbrook's older neighborhoods with the deed in his glove compartment, Jace wondered what he'd done. Sycamore Street sat at the town's edge, where sidewalks gave way to gravel and streetlights grew sparse. The houses here had been built in the 60s and 70s, modest homes with generous yards where children had once played and gardens had flourished. Number 1247 stood apart from its neighbors, not just in its obvious abandonment, but in its design. Where other houses were simple ranches or split levels, this one rose 2 stories with a wraparound porch and gingerbread trim that spoke of an earlier era. Plywood covered the windows. Ivy climbed the walls with determined persistence. The front yard had surrendered to weeds and volunteer trees that created a natural barrier between the house and the street. Jace parked in the cracked driveway and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled. Ollie stirred in the passenger seat, rubbing his eyes. "Are we here, Dad?" "Yeah, buddy. We're here." They approached the front porch together, stepping carefully around loose boards and trailing vines. The key from the courthouse fit perfectly in the original lock, which turned with surprising ease. The front door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through the neighborhood. What they found inside defied every expectation Jace had formed during the drive over. The house wasn't destroyed. It wasn't empty. It was preserved. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the plywood, illuminating a living room that belonged to another decade. A floral sofa sat arranged with throw pillows that still held their shape. Magazines from 1993 lay fanned across a coffee table. National Geographic, Better Homes and Gardens, Scientific American. A child's sneakers sat by the door, small and white with rainbow laces, as if their owner had just stepped out of them. Jace and Ollie moved through the house with the reverence of visitors in a museum. The kitchen held dishes in the sink, a recipe box open to Emma's favorite chocolate chip cookies. The handwriting was neat, feminine, with little hearts dotting the eyes. A grocery list hung on the refrigerator, items like milk, bread, and birthday candles, written in the same careful script. Upstairs, they found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom felt heavy with absent-say a man's watch on the nightstand, a woman's reading glasses beside a bookmark in a romance novel. The second bedroom appeared to be an office, with filing cabinets and a desk covered in papers that Jace didn't feel right examining too closely. But it was the third bedroom that made Ollie gasp and Jace's breath catch in his throat. It was a child's room, but not like any child's room Jace had ever seen. The walls were covered with drawings, not the typical stick figures and crayon houses most kids created, but detailed sketches of machines, diagrams with labels and arrows, mathematical equations written in a surprisingly mature hand. A telescope sat by the window, still pointing toward the sky. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes that seemed far too advanced for a child. Advanced physics, the chemistry of life, engineering principles. On the desk sat a framed school photograph of a girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. She had serious dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. A small placard at the bottom of the frame read, "Emma Hartwell, 6th grade, Millbrook Elementary." Ollie picked up the photograph with careful hands. "Dad, who is this?" Jace studied the picture, noting the intelligence in the girl's expression, the way she seemed to be looking directly at them across the decades. "I think this is who used to live here, buddy." Her name was Emma. Where did she go? It was the question that would haunt them both, the mystery that would transform their desperate search for shelter into something far more profound. Jace set the photograph back on the desk with the same care Ollie had shown. "I don't know yet, but maybe we can find out." As they explored the rest of Emma's room, Jace began to understand why the neighbors had called this place cursed, why it had sat empty for 30 years. It wasn't haunted by ghosts, it was haunted by the weight of interrupted dreams, by the sense that a remarkable life had been cut short before it could fulfill its promise. But for Jace and Ollie, standing in the golden afternoon light filtering through the covered windows, it felt like something else entirely. It felt like home had found them when they needed it most. Their first week in the house passed in a strange rhythm of discovery and domestication. Jace had managed to get the electricity turned on, though the water would take another few days. They used bottled water from the corner store and ate sandwiches by lamplight, feeling like pioneers in their own strange frontier. Ollie had claimed Emma's room as his own, but he'd been careful not to disturb anything. He slept on an air mattress on the floor while Emma's bed remained perfectly made, her stuffed animals arranged against the pillows. Each morning, Jace would find his son studying Emma's wall drawings with the intensity of a scholar deciphering ancient texts. "Dad, look at this one," Ollie said on Thursday morning, pointing to a detailed sketch near the window. "It's some kind of water cleaner. See these tubes and filters? And here," he traced his finger along penciled arrows, "dirty water goes in here, and clean water comes out here." Jace studied the drawing. Even to his untrained eye, it looked sophisticated, far beyond what he'd expect from a child. Mathematical formulas filled the margins, and the mechanical details showed an understanding of engineering principles that seemed impossible for someone Emma's age. "She was really smart, wasn't she?" Ollie asked. "She was extraordinary," Jace agreed. It was while cleaning out a closet in Emma's room that Jace made the discovery that would change everything. He'd been sorting through boxes of old clothes items that might be donated or discarded when his hand brushed against something hidden behind the hanging dresses. A wooden panel in the back wall moved slightly under pressure. Curious, Jace pushed harder. The panel slid sideways, revealing a hidden compartment just large enough to hold a single notebook. His hands trembled as he lifted it out, recognizing immediately that this was something Emma had deliberately concealed. The notebook was bound, in worn leather, its pages filled with Emma's careful handwriting. The first page bore the title, "My Scientific Journal, Private Property of Emma Catherine Hartwell." Below that, in smaller print, "If you are reading this and I am not here to give you permission, please be kind to my ideas. They are all I have to leave behind." Jace's throat tightened as he read those words. He called for Ollie, who came running up the stairs with the excitement of a boy who'd been waiting all week for something interesting to happen. Together, they sat on Emma's bed and opened the journal. What they found inside defied every assumption about childhood and genius that either of them had ever held. The journal contained over 200 pages of detailed scientific observations, invention sketches, and theoretical work that read like the notebooks of a graduate student. Emma had documented experiments in chemistry, physics, and engineering with the methodical precision of a trained researcher. Her handwriting grew more confident as the journal progressed, her ideas more complex and far-reaching. One section was devoted entirely to water purification systems. Emma had apparently become fascinated with the problem after a school presentation about children in developing countries who lacked access to clean drinking water. Her initial sketches were simple, but they evolved over dozens of pages into increasingly sophisticated designs. "Look at this," Jace whispered, turning to a page titled Solar-Powered Purification Unit, version 12. The drawing showed a compact device that could apparently purify contaminated water using nothing but sunlight and a series of innovative filters. The margins were filled with calculations about flow rates, filtration efficiency, and cost projections. "She wanted to help people," Ollie said quietly. "Kids like us, but in other countries." Jace turned the page and found something that made his heart skip. It was a letter, written in Emma's careful script and dated just 3 months before the family's disappearance. "Dear future me," it began, "if you are reading this, it means you survived to be at least 16, which would make me very happy. I wanted to write down everything I've learned about the water purifier in case something happens to me before I can finish it properly. Mom says I worry too much about grown-up things, but I know I'm different from other kids, and I don't think I'm going to have as much time as everyone else. The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Emma's fears about her health, her frustration with adults who didn't take her ideas seriously, and her desperate hope that someone would someday continue her work. She wrote about feeling isolated from children her own age, about teachers who didn't know what to do with a student who had already surpassed their knowledge, about parents who loved her but couldn't understand the urgency she felt about her projects. I dream about the day when no child has to die from drinking dirty water, she wrote near the end. I know that sounds like something an adult would say, but I've seen the photographs in National Geographic, and I can't stop thinking about it. If I can't grow up to fix this problem myself, maybe someone else will find my work and make it real. Jace had to stop reading. The weight of Emma's words, the maturity of her concerns, the poignant hope in her writing it, all felt too heavy for the small bedroom where they sat, surrounded by the artifacts of her interrupted life. "Dad." Ollie's voice was small. "What happened to her?" Before Jace could answer, they heard a knock at the front door. It was their first visitor since moving in, and Jace felt oddly protective of Emma's secrets as he went downstairs to answer it. On the porch stood an elderly woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that reminded Jace immediately of Emma's school photograph. She carried a covered casserole dish and wore the expression of someone who had been debating this visit for days. "I'm Martha Kowalski," she said. "I live 3 houses down. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, and I brought you some dinner." She paused, studying Jace's face. "I also wanted to talk to you about the house you've bought." Jace invited her in, grateful for adult conversation after a week of just him and Ollie. Martha set the casserole on the kitchen counter and looked around the preserved room with an expression of deep sadness. "I haven't been inside this house in 30 years, she said quietly. "It looks exactly the same." "You knew the family?" Jace asked. Martha nodded. "I was the children's librarian at Millbrook Public Library for 42 years. Emma Hartwell was one of my most devoted patrons. That child read everything we had on science and engineering, then started requesting books through interlibrary loan that most adults couldn't understand." She smiled at the memory. She'd come in every Tuesday after school, arms loaded with returned books, ready to check out another stack that was taller than she was. "What happened to them?" The question came from Ollie, who had appeared at the bottom of the stairs with Emma's journal clutched against his chest. Martha's expression grew heavy. "Oh, honey, it was such a tragedy. Emma got very sick, very suddenly. The doctors said it was a rare condition, something with her blood. She was in and out of the hospital for months, but she kept working on her projects even when she was too weak to walk." Jace felt the pieces clicking into place. "She died just 3 weeks before her 13th birthday, Martha confirmed. Her parents were devastated. They couldn't bear to change anything in the house, couldn't bear to sell it or rent it out. They just locked the door and moved away. I heard they went to live with relatives in California, but they never came back." The 3 of them stood in the preserved kitchen, surrounded by the weight of that revelation. Emma hadn't disappeared mysteriously. She had simply run out of time, the way children sometimes do when the world moves too fast for small bodies to keep up. "She was special," Martha continued, "not just smart but kind. She used to help other children with their homework at the library, always patient, even when they couldn't keep up with her thinking. She talked about wanting to invent things that would help people, especially children who were suffering somewhere in the world." Ollie held up the journal. "We found this. She wrote about wanting to help kids who don't have clean water." Martha's eyes filled with tears. She talked about that project constantly in her final months. Even when she was so weak the doctors said she should be resting, she'd be at the library researching filtration systems and solar energy. She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse. "I always wondered what happened to all her work." Jace looked at his son, at the elderly librarian, who had loved Emma like a granddaughter, at the kitchen where a brilliant child had sat doing homework that could have changed the world. The weight of responsibility settled on his shoulders like a familiar coat. "Would you help us understand what she was working on?" he asked Martha. "Would you help us learn about Emma?" Martha smiled through her tears. "Honey, I thought you'd never ask." Martha became their guide into Emma's world. The next afternoon, she returned with a box of photocopied articles and a determined expression that reminded Jace of his late wife when Sarah had decided something needed to be accomplished. "I spent all night going through my files," Martha explained as they settled in the living room. "I kept everything related to Emma's library research. Call it a librarian's instinct, but I knew someday this information would matter." Ollie sat cross-legged on the floor, Emma's journal open in his lap. Over the past day, he'd become increasingly absorbed in trying to decode Emma's drawings and notes. Jace watched his son with a mixture of pride and concern. It was the most animated Ollie had been since Sarah's death, but there was something almost desperate in the way he clung to Emma's story. "Tell us about the music box," Martha said, pulling out a manila folder. "Did you find it yet?" Jace and Ollie exchanged glances. "What music box?" Martha smiled. "Emma mentioned it in one of our last conversations. She said she'd hidden something important inside a music box that her grandmother had given her. She was very secretive about it, said it was the key to understanding her most important work." They spent the next hour searching Emma's room systematically. Martha directed them with the patience of someone who had helped countless children find lost library books. Finally, Ollie discovered it behind a collection of stuffed animals on a high shelf, a wooden music box, carved with delicate roses and painted in soft pastels. The box was heavier than expected, its weight suggesting hidden complexity. When Jace lifted the lid, a gentle melody began to play, something classical that he didn't recognize, but that seemed to fill the room with the essence of childhood and lost innocence. "Pachelbel's Canon," Martha said softly. "Emma's favorite piece. She said it was mathematically perfect." But as they listened, Ollie's head tilted with the focused attention he'd inherited from his mother. "Dad, there's something wrong with the melody." "Wrong how?" "It's not playing the right notes. Listen." Ollie hummed along, his perfect pitch-catching discrepancies that the adults missed. "Some of the notes are different from the real song. And they're not random mistakes, they're deliberate." Martha leaned forward with excitement. Emma mentioned that she'd modified something to create a code. She was fascinated by the idea of hiding messages in plain sight. Over the next 2 hours, with Martha providing historical context and Ollie's musical ear identifying the altered notes, they began to crack Emma's cipher. She had changed specific notes in the melody to correspond to letters of the alphabet. When they transcribed the modified notes onto paper, a message emerged. "Look where the morning light touches the eastern wall at 8 o'clock on the 7th day after my birthday." Jace felt a chill of recognition. According to the dates in Emma's journal, her birthday had been October 15th. 7 days later would have been October 2020, just 2 weeks before the family's disappearance. "She knew," he said quietly. "She knew she was running out of time." The next Sunday morning found all three of them in Emma's room at 8 o'clock, watching as the autumn sun streamed through the single unboarded window. The light moved across the eastern wall like a golden spotlight, illuminating different sections of Emma's drawings as the minutes passed. At exactly 8:07, the sunlight fell on a sketch that looked different from the others. Where Emma's other drawings were done in pencil, this one included small marks in what appeared to be invisible ink marks that only became visible under direct sunlight. "Clever girl," Martha murmured as the hidden message revealed itself. It was a map of the house, showing the location of something marked with a star in the basement, behind the water heater. The basement had been one area of the house that Jace had avoided exploring. It felt too intrusive, too much like grave robbing. But Emma's elaborate cipher suggested she had wanted someone to find whatever she'd hidden there. The basement was exactly what Jace had expected: concrete floors, exposed beams, the musty smell of 30 years without proper ventilation. The water heater sat in the far corner, a cylindrical monument to 1,000 1980s engineering that somehow still functioned. Behind it, exactly where Emma's map indicated, they found a loose stone in the foundation wall. Jace worked it free with his hands, revealing a cavity just large enough to hold a metal document, tube the kind photographers used to protect negatives. Inside the tube were architectural drawings unlike anything in Emma's journal. These weren't sketches or ideas. They were professional, quality blueprints for a water purification system that looked decades ahead of its time. Every component was labeled, every measurement precise, every angle calculated to the degree. But more importantly, tucked between the blueprints, they found a partially completed patent application. Emma had been trying to protect her invention legally, to ensure that her ideas could benefit the world, even if she wasn't there to oversee their development. The patent application was written in the careful language of legal documents, though Emma's youth showed through in places where her natural enthusiasm overcame formal constraints. She described her invention as a solar-powered water purification system designed to provide safe drinking water for children in underserved communities worldwide. The technical specifications were staggering. Emma's system could purify contaminated water at a rate of 50 gallons per day, using nothing but sunlight and a series of innovative filters she had designed herself. The projected cost per unit was less than $200, making it affordable for deployment in developing nations. "This is revolutionary," Martha said, studying the blueprints with growing amazement. "I mean, I knew Emma was brilliant, but this could save millions of lives." Jace found himself thinking about the weight of what they'd discovered. Emma's invention wasn't just clever, it was genuinely world-changing. And she had died before she could share it with anyone who might have the resources to make it real. That evening, after Martha had gone home with promises to research the patent process, Jace and Ollie sat in Emma's room, surrounded by the evidence of her remarkable mind. The music box played its coded melody in the background, a soundtrack to their growing understanding of the girl who had lived here. "Dad," Ollie said quietly, "what are we supposed to do with all this?" It was the question that had been haunting Jace since they'd found the journal. Emma had left behind ideas that could change the world, but she'd left them in the hands of a grieving father and a 10-year-old boy who were just trying to survive their own losses. "I don't know yet, buddy," Jace admitted, "but I think Emma wanted someone to find her work. Maybe that someone is us." Ollie picked up Emma's school photograph, studying her serious expression and intelligent eyes. She was trying to help people, even though she was just a kid. She was trying to help people because she was a kid. Jace corrected gently. "Sometimes children see solutions that adults miss because they haven't learned yet that some problems are supposed to be impossible to solve." As they prepared for bed that night, both father and son felt the weight of Emma's legacy settling around them like a mantle. They had come to this house looking for shelter and had found instead a purpose neither of them had expected. The music box continued to play its secret melody, filling the darkness with the promise that some gifts are too precious to remain buried forever. Martha returned the following Tuesday with an armload of research materials and the focused determination of a woman on a mission. She'd spent 2 days at the county library, the university library in the next town, and on the phone with patent attorneys who specialized in intellectual property law. "The good news," she announced as they gathered around the kitchen table, "is that Emma's patent application was never filed. That means her ideas are still protected under what's called prior art laws, and we could potentially complete the application process on her behalf." Jace felt his heart racing. "What's the bad news?" "The bad news is that we need to prove the invention actually works. A patent isn't just about having a good idea. You have to demonstrate that the idea can be manufactured and will perform as promised." Ollie, who had been studying Emma's blueprints with increasing fascination, looked up from his careful examination of a filter design. "Could we build it? Could we actually make Emma's water cleaner?" Martha smiled at his enthusiasm. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd ask. I spoke with Dr. Patricia Chen at State University. She runs the environmental engineering department, and she's agreed to look at Emma's designs. If they're as revolutionary as they appear to be, she might be willing to help us create a prototype. The drive to State University took 45 minutes through countryside that reminded Jace of better times, when he and Sarah had taken weekend trips to explore small towns and antique shops. Ollie sat in the back seat with Emma's blueprints carefully protected in a portfolio Martha had provided, treating them with the reverence of a monk transporting sacred texts. Dr. Chen's laboratory occupied an entire floor of the engineering building, filled with sophisticated equipment that made Emma's bedroom workshop look primitive by comparison. But when Dr. Chen examined Emma's blueprints, her expression shifted from polite interest to genuine amazement. "Where did you say these designs came from?" she asked, studying the filtration schematics with growing excitement. "A 12-year-old girl named Emma Hartwell," Jace replied. "She died 30 years ago, before she could finish her work." Dr. Chen looked up sharply. "A 12-year-old designed this? That's impossible. This level of engineering sophistication, the understanding of fluid dynamics, solar energy conversion, molecular filtration, this represents years of graduate-level study." Martha pulled out Emma's school photograph. She was what we used to call a child prodigy. Spent most of her free time at the library, reading scientific journals that most adults couldn't understand. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Chen examined every aspect of Emma's designs. She ran calculations, consulted reference materials, and made phone calls to colleagues who specialized in various aspects of water purification technology. "I need to be completely honest with you," she finally said. "These designs are not just viable, they're brilliant." Emma somehow intuited engineering principles that weren't even formally recognized until the late 1990s. Her solar energy conversion system is more efficient than anything currently on the market. Her filtration method combines multiple technologies in ways that no one has attempted. Jace felt a strange mixture of pride and sadness. Pride for Emma's extraordinary gifts, sadness that the world had lost such a remarkable mind before it could flourish. "More importantly," Dr. Chen continued, "I believe we can build this. My graduate students and I have been working on similar problems for years, but we've never approached the solution from this angle. Emma's design is elegant in ways that our more conventional approaches aren't." Ollie leaned forward eagerly. "So it would really work? It would really clean dirty water?" "Not just clean it," Dr. Chen replied. "According to these specifications, Emma's system would purify water to a standard that exceeds most municipal treatment plants, and it would do it using nothing but sunlight and filters that could be manufactured for less than $50 each." The implications hit Jace like a physical force. Emma's invention wasn't just clever, it was the kind of breakthrough that could legitimately change the world. And somehow, through a combination of desperation and chance, he and Ollie had become the custodians of her legacy. "What would it take to build a prototype?" Martha asked, always the practical librarian. Dr. Chen consulted her notes. 3 months, maybe 4. I'd need to secure funding for materials and graduate assistant time, but this is exactly the kind of project that attracts grant money. There are foundations specifically devoted to developing clean water technology for underserved populations. As they drove home, Ollie was unusually quiet. Jace caught his eye in the rearview mirror and saw the thoughtful expression that meant his son was processing something important. "What's on your mind, buddy?" "I keep thinking about Emma," Ollie said. "She was our age when she figured all this out. She was just a kid, but she was trying to save people." Jace pulled over at a roadside park and turned to face his son. "Does that inspire you or worry you?" "Both, I guess. I mean, I'm 10 and I can barely figure out my math homework. But Emma was 12 and she invented something that could help millions of people." Ollie looked down at the portfolio containing Emma's blueprints. "What if I'm supposed to do something important too, but I'm not smart enough?" The question broke Jace's heart and filled it simultaneously. He got out of the car and sat on the picnic table where Ollie had moved to watch the clouds. "You know what I think made Emma special?" Jace said finally. "It wasn't just that she was smart. Lots of people are smart. What made Emma extraordinary was that she cared about people she'd never met, kids on the other side of the world who needed clean water. She used her gifts to try to help others. But I don't have gifts like that. Says who? Jace smiled at his son. You're the one who figured out that Emma's music box was playing the wrong notes. You're the one who noticed patterns in her drawings that Martha and I missed. You have your mother's heart and your own unique way of seeing the world. Ollie considered this. Do you think Mom would have liked Emma? The question caught Jace off guard, but as he thought about it, he realized the answer was obvious. She would have loved Emma. Your mom always said that the most beautiful thing about children was their natural desire to make the world better. That evening, back in Emma's room, they made a decision that would change everything. Martha had left them with contact information for several foundations that funded clean water initiatives, along with a stack of grant applications and legal forms. We're going to do this, Jace announced. We're going to make Emma's invention real. Ollie looked up from Emma's journal, which he'd been reading like a bedtime story. Even if it takes a long time, even if it takes years, Emma deserves to have her work shared with the world, and there are children out there who need what she created. As they prepared for bed, Jace realized that for the first time since Sarah's death, he felt something that had been missing from their lives: purpose. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were working towards something meaningful, something that connected them to the brilliant girl who had lived in this house and dreamed of changing the world. The music box played its coded melody one more time before Jace closed the lid, its secret message now decoded, but its promise just beginning to unfold. 3 weeks into their collaboration with Dr. Chen, Ollie made a discovery that changed their understanding of Emma's story completely. He'd been methodically examining every inch of Emma's room, treating it like an archaeological site where each artifact might reveal crucial information about the girl who had lived there. It was while investigating a loose floorboard near Emma's desk that he found Thema collection of letters hidden in a small space between the joists. Unlike Emma's scientific journal, these letters were deeply personal, written in the voice of a lonely child, trying to make sense of a world that moved too fast for her extraordinary mind. Dear future Emma, the first letter began, dated 2 years before her death. I am writing this on my 10th birthday. Everyone gave me toys. But what I really wanted was someone to understand why I spend so much time thinking about problems that grown-ups say I'm too young to worry about. Jace read the letters aloud to Martha and Ollie that evening, his voice catching on passages that revealed Emma's profound isolation, despite her loving parents and comfortable home. The other kids at school think I'm weird because I read science books during recess, one letter continued. Mrs. Patterson, my teacher, keeps telling my parents that I need to act more like a normal child, but I don't know how to stop my brain from working the way it does. When I see pictures of children in other countries who are sick from dirty water, I can't stop thinking about it until I figure out how to help them. Another letter, written just months before her death, revealed the weight of Emma's growing awareness of her own mortality. Dear future Emma, if you exist, I went to the doctor again today. Mom and Dad think I don't understand what the doctors are saying, but I do. I understand everything. And I know that I might not get to grow up the way other kids do. That's why I'm working so hard on the water purifier. If I can't live long enough to help people myself, maybe I can leave behind something that will help them after I'm gone. The letters painted a picture of a child who carried the concerns of the world on her shoulders, who felt responsible for solving problems that had challenged humanity for generations. But they also revealed Emma's deep capacity for love and her desperate wish for connection. Sometimes I pretend that someday a family will move into our house and find all my work, she wrote in one of her final letters. I pretend that they'll understand what I was trying to do and that they'll help me finish it. I know that's probably silly, but it makes me feel less alone when I'm working late at night on my projects. Ollie looked up from the letter with tears in his eyes. Dad, she was writing to us. She knew we would come. Martha wiped her own eyes with a tissue. Children like Emma often have an intuitive understanding of things that adults miss. Maybe she did know, in some way, that her work would find the right people. The letters also provided crucial information about Emma's invention process. She described experiments conducted in secret, materials purchased with birthday money, and the growing urgency she felt as her health declined. Most importantly, she mentioned additional prototypes hidden in various locations around the house. "I built 3 different versions of the water purifier," one letter explained. "The first one is in my bedroom closet, behind the loose board. The second one is in the basement, next to my chemistry set. The third one is in the attic, inside an old suitcase. I wanted to make sure that if something happened to one of them, the others would survive." The hunt for Emma's prototypes became a family project that brought Martha, Jace, and Ollie together in ways that reminded Jace of better times. Martha approached it with a librarian's systematic methodology. Jace contributed his practical problem-solving skills, and Ollie provided the intuitive leap that often led them to exactly the right place. They found the first prototype exactly where Emma had described: shoebox-sized device constructed from PVC pipes, solar cells salvaged from a broken calculator, and filters that appeared to be made from household materials but showed sophisticated understanding of molecular science. The basement prototype was more advanced, clearly representing months of refinement and improvement. Emma had somehow acquired professional-grade components, precision filters, high-efficiency solar panels, electronic monitoring systems that could have come from a commercial laboratory. How did a 12-year-old get access to this equipment? Dr. Chen wondered when they brought the prototypes to her laboratory for analysis. Martha had the answer. "Emma's uncle worked for a water treatment company. I remember her mentioning that he would bring her samples of different filtration materials. He probably had no idea she was using them to build functional prototypes. But it was the third prototype, hidden in the attic suitcase, that took everyone's breath away. This wasn't a child's experiment or even an advanced student project. It was a fully functional water purification system that looked like it could have been manufactured commercially. "This is impossible," Dr. Chen muttered as she examined the device. "The engineering tolerances, the component integration, the efficiency calculations. This represents a level of sophistication that most of my graduate students couldn't achieve." The attic prototype came with its own documentation, detailed test results, showing that Emma had purified water from the polluted creek behind her house, water from the municipal supply system, and even samples that she'd deliberately contaminated to test her system's limits. Every test showed the same result. Emma's invention produced water that exceeded all federal purity standards while using less energy than any existing system. "She really did it," Ollie whispered, staring at the test results. "She really solved the problem." But perhaps the most moving discovery in the attic was a final letter, sealed in an envelope marked, "For whoever finds my work." "If you are reading this," Emma had written, "it means that I didn't get to finish what I started. That makes me sad, but not as sad as you might think. I always knew that the most important inventions belong to everyone, not just to the people who create them." The letter continued, "I hope that whoever finds my water purifier will make it available to children who need clean water to survive. I hope they will remember that behind every invention is someone who cared enough about other people to spend their time trying to solve problems instead of just worrying about them." Emma ended with a request that broke everyone's heart. "If you use my invention to help people, please tell them that it came from a girl who wanted to make sure that no child ever died from something as simple as dirty water. Tell them that love can survive, even when the person who felt it cannot." That night, as they sat in Emma's room, surrounded by the evidence of her remarkable life, Martha made an observation that would stay with all of them. "You know," she said quietly, "I've been thinking about what made Emma so special. It wasn't just her intelligence, though she was certainly brilliant. It was her empathy. She could imagine the suffering of children she'd never met, in places she'd never been, and that imagination drove her to work harder than any adult I've ever known." Jace looked at his son, who had spent the day carefully cataloguing Emma's prototypes with the same attention to detail that Emma herself had shown. "I think Emma's greatest invention wasn't the water purifier," he said. "I think it was the example she set, showing us that age doesn't matter when it comes to caring about others, that the best reason to use our gifts is to help people we'll never meet." As they prepared for bed, Ollie asked the question that had been haunting all of them. What happens now? What do we do with everything Emma left behind? Jace tucked the letters back into their hiding place with the same care that Emma had shown when she'd placed them there 3 decades earlier. "Now, we keep the promise she asked us to make. We make sure her work reaches the children who need it." Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of the house that had sheltered Emma's dreams and now sheltered theirs. Inside, 3 people who had started as strangers were becoming a family united by the legacy of a girl whose greatest wish was simply to help others survive. The discovery that would unlock Emma's greatest secret came from the most mundane of sources. Ollie's natural curiosity about a jewelry box that sat on Emma's dresser, seemingly ordinary among her collection of scientific instruments and books. The jewelry box was carved from dark wood and inlaid with mother-of-pearl butterflies. It seemed out of place among Emma's technical possessions, more suited to a girl who collected dolls than one who designed water purification systems. But Ollie had learned that nothing in Emma's room was quite what it appeared to be. "There's something weird about this box," he told Jace one Saturday morning as they cleaned Emma's room together. "It's too heavy for jewelry, and listen." He shook it gently, producing a metallic rattle that didn't sound like rings or necklaces. When they opened the box, they found typical childhood treasures: few pieces of costume jewelry, some hair ribbons, a small collection of interesting rocks. But tucked beneath the red velvet lining was something that made Jace's heart skip: a small brass key attached to a ribbon with a note in Emma's handwriting. "The key to understanding everything is usually hidden in plain sight," the note read. "Look for the door that doesn't look like a door." The search for Emma's hidden door became an obsession that consumed their weekend. Martha joined them, bringing the systematic approach that had made her an excellent librarian. They examined every wall, every closet, every piece of furniture that might conceal a hidden entrance. It was Ollie who finally solved the puzzle, applying the same pattern recognition skills that had helped him decode Emma's music box cipher. He noticed that one section of basement wall was covered with wood paneling, while the rest was exposed, stoner detail that adult eyes had dismissed as typical basement renovation. "Dad, why would someone panel just this one section?" he asked, running his hands along the wood grain. "And look, these aren't real boards. They're painted to look like wood, but they're actually one big piece." The brass key fit perfectly into a lock, hidden behind a fake electrical outlet. When Jace turned it, they heard the soft click of a mechanism engaging, and the entire paneled section swung inward like a door. What they found beyond that door defied every assumption they'd made about Emma's capabilities. It was a laboratory, not a child's science corner, but a genuine research facility that would have impressed professional engineers. Emma had somehow converted a section of the basement into a workspace equipped with microscopes, chemical analysis equipment, precision measuring tools, and testing apparatus that must have cost thousands of dollars. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with prototypes in various stages of completion. Emma had built dozens of devices, not just water purifiers, but air filters, solar panels, chemical testing kits, and machines whose purposes weren't immediately obvious. Each prototype was labeled with careful documentation describing its function, its testing results, and its potential applications. "My God," Martha whispered, moving through the laboratory like a visitor in a shrine. "She built all of this herself?" The centerpiece of the laboratory was a complete water purification system, not a prototype, but a finished product that looked ready for commercial manufacturing. This wasn't the experimental device they'd found in the attic. This was Emma's final design, incorporating every lesson she'd learned from her earlier attempts. Dr. Chen, when they brought her to see the laboratory the following week, stood speechless for several minutes before finding her voice. "This is graduate-level work," she finally said. "This is beyond graduate-level work. Some of these innovations," She picked up a filtration component that seemed impossibly compact for its complexity. I've never seen anything like this. Emma wasn't just copying existing technology, she was inventing entirely new approaches to problems that have challenged scientists for decades. But the most remarkable discovery in Emma's laboratory wasn't any single invention. It was her documentation system. Emma had kept meticulous records of every experiment, every failure, every breakthrough. Her laboratory notebooks read like the research journals of a seasoned scientist, complete with hypotheses, methodologies, statistical analysis, and peer review protocols. "Look at this," Dr. Chen said, opening one of Emma's later notebooks. "She's conducting double-blind testing on her own inventions. She's calculating confidence intervals. She's following research protocols that most professionals don't even know about." Emma's final notebook, dated just weeks before her death, contained entries that revealed both her extraordinary scientific maturity and her childlike hope for the future. "I know I'm running out of time," one entry began, "but I think I've finally perfected the water purifier design. The latest tests show 99.97% contaminant removal, energy efficiency that exceeds anything currently available, and manufacturing costs low enough to make the system affordable in developing nations." She continued, "I've been thinking about what happens to all this work if I don't get better. Mom and Dad love me, but they don't understand what I've been doing down here. They think it's just a hobby, something to keep me busy while I'm sick. They don't realize that these inventions could actually save lives." The final entry in Emma's notebook was dated 3 days before the family's departure from the house. "I've decided to leave everything exactly as it is. If something happens to me, maybe someday the right person will find this laboratory and understand what I was trying to accomplish. I've written instructions for manufacturing the water purifier and hidden them in the place where they'll be safest. Whoever finds my work, please remember that every invention represents hours I could have spent feeling sorry for myself, but chose instead to spend trying to help other people." That evening, as they sat in Emma's preserved bedroom, Jace realized that their small family had been entrusted with something far more significant than they'd initially understood. Emma hadn't just left behind clever inventions, she'd left behind a complete research program that could revolutionize clean water technology for millions of people. "The responsibility is enormous," he said to Martha and Ollie. "What if we make the wrong decisions? What if we can't live up to what Emma wanted to accomplish?" Martha, who had been quietly contemplating the implications of their discovery, offered the wisdom that comes from decades of helping people find answers to difficult questions. "Emma didn't leave her work to perfect people," she said. "She left it to people who cared enough to look for it, to understand its value, and to honor her memory by sharing it with the world. That's us, imperfect as we are." Ollie, who had been studying photographs of Emma's various prototypes, looked up with the kind of insight that reminded Jace daily of Sarah's intuitive wisdom. "I think Emma knew we would find her laboratory," he said. "I think she knew that someone like us people who needed help themselves would be the ones to understand why her inventions mattered so much." As they prepared to leave Emma's laboratory that night, carefully locking the door and returning the key to its hiding place in the jewelry box, they each understood that their lives had been permanently changed by a 12-year-old girl who had believed that love could survive even when the person who felt it could not. The laboratory hummed quietly in the darkness, Emma's inventions waiting patiently for the day when they would finally reach the children they had been designed to save. The revelation that would change everything came not from Emma's hidden laboratory or her scientific journals, but from a manila envelope that Martha discovered while researching Emma's family history at the county courthouse. "I wanted to find out more about Emma's parents," Martha explained when she arrived at the house the following Tuesday, her arms full of photocopied documents. "I thought it might help us understand how to honor Emma's memory properly if we knew more about the people who raised such an extraordinary child." What Martha had found among the public records was a file that painted a picture of a family struggling with circumstances far more complex than anyone had imagined. "Jace, Ollie," Martha said, her voice heavy with the weight of discovery. "I need to tell you something about Emma that changes everything we thought we knew about her story." They gathered in the living room, surrounded by the familiar artifacts of Emma's preserved childhood. But as Martha opened the manila envelope, the atmosphere in the room shifted from warm nostalgia to something far more profound. "Emma didn't just die from a rare disease," Martha began, pulling out a stack of medical records that had been filed as part of the family's insurance claim. "She died from juvenile myeloid leukemia, particularly aggressive form of blood cancer that primarily affects children between the ages of 10 and 15. Jace felt his stomach tighten. He knew enough about childhood leukemia to understand the implications. "The medical records show that Emma was diagnosed when she was 11, Martha continued. "But here's what's remarkable and heartbreaking. Emma knew her diagnosis. She understood her prognosis, and she made a conscious decision to spend what time she had left working on inventions that could help other children survive illnesses she knew she couldn't beat herself." Martha pulled out a letter written by Emma's oncologist to her parents, dated 6 months before Emma's death. "Emma is an extraordinary patient," the letter read. "Despite her youth, she has demonstrated an understanding of her condition that exceeds that of most adult patients. She has specifically requested that her treatment schedule be arranged to allow her maximum time for what she calls her work. While we typically encourage children to focus on normal childhood activities during treatment, Emma's dedication to her scientific projects appears to be providing her with a sense of purpose that may be contributing to her psychological resilience." The letter continued with details that brought tears to everyone's eyes. "Emma has informed me that she is working on inventions designed to help children in developing countries who lack access to clean water and medical care. She has asked me to help her understand the medical challenges faced by children with waterborne illnesses, saying that she wants to make sure her inventions address real problems rather than theoretical ones. I have never encountered a child patient with such mature awareness of global health issues." But it was the next document that revealed the true scope of Emma's extraordinary courage. Martha pulled out a handwritten letter from Emma to her parents, found among her father's papers after his death several years earlier. "My dear Mom and Dad," the letter began, "I know you think I don't understand what's happening to me, but I do. I know that I have leukemia, and I know that the treatments aren't working the way the doctors hoped they would." Emma's letter continued with the wisdom of someone far older than her 12 years. "I'm not scared of dying, but I am scared of dying without leaving something useful behind. I've been reading about children in other countries who die from dirty water, and I realize that maybe I can help them even if I can't help myself. If I can invent a way to clean water that's simple and cheap enough for poor families to use, then maybe my life will have mattered for something important." The final paragraph of Emma's letter revealed the full depth of her sacrifice. "I know you want me to spend more time just being a kid, playing with friends and watching movies and doing normal things. But normal things feel empty when I know that other children are dying from problems I might be able to solve. Please let me keep working on my inventions. It's the only way I can feel like I'm fighting back against the unfairness of being sick." Martha wiped her eyes before continuing. "There's more. Emma's medical records show that she refused several treatment options that might have extended her life because they would have interfered with her cognitive abilities. She chose to remain clear-headed so she could continue working, even though it meant accepting a shorter survival time." The weight of this revelation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Emma hadn't been a child prodigy who happened to get sick. She had been a dying child who chose to spend her final months trying to save other children rather than extending her own life. "She gave up time," Ollie said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "She gave up her own time so she could help kids she would never meet." Martha nodded. "But there's something else, something that makes Emma's story even more remarkable." She pulled out a final document of video cassette tape labeled "For Emma's Future Family" in careful handwriting. Emma's mother left this with their attorney before the family moved to California, Martha explained. The instructions were that it should be given to whoever eventually bought the house, but only if they seemed to genuinely care about Emma's memory. Martha had brought a small television and VCR from her own house. As she inserted the tape, the room filled with the soft static of analog recording. Then Emma's face appeared on the screen, not the serious school photograph they'd grown familiar with, but a living, breathing child with bright eyes and a gentle smile. "Hi," Emma said, her voice clear despite the obvious fatigue in her face. "If you're watching this, it means that someone special has moved into my house and found my work. My mum said she would make sure this tape got to the right people, and I trust her to know who that would be." Emma continued, speaking directly to them across 3 decades, with the calm confidence of someone who had made peace with her fate. "I want you to know that everything I invented for you. Not for you specifically, because I don't know who you are, but for people like you, people who care about helping others, people who understand that the best reason to use your brain is to make life better for someone else." The video showed Emma in her hidden laboratory, demonstrating her water purification system with the expertise of a seasoned engineer. "I hope my inventions help children who need clean water," she said. "But more than that, I hope they help you understand that being sick doesn't mean being helpless. Some of the most important work in the world gets done by people who don't have very much time to do it." Emma's final message was addressed directly to any children who might find her work. "If there are kids watching this, I want you to know that age doesn't matter when it comes to making a difference. I was 12 when I figured out how to clean dirty water, and you might be even younger when you figure out how to solve a problem that adults have been struggling with for years. Don't let anyone tell you that you're too young to change the world." As the video ended with Emma waving goodbye, the 3 people sitting in her preserved living room understood that they had been chosen not just to preserve her memory, but to complete a mission that she had begun, with the full knowledge that she wouldn't live to see its conclusion. The house around them felt different, now not just a shelter they had stumbled into, but a sacred space where a dying child had worked to save other children's lives. Emma's inventions weren't just clever devices, they were love letters to a future she would never see, written in the language of science and sealed with the sacrifice of her remaining time. "What do we do now?" Jace asked, though he already knew the answer. "Now we keep the promise she made to children she would never meet," Martha replied. "We make sure Emma's love reaches everyone it was intended to reach." Emma's video message changed everything. What had begun as a quest to understand the mysterious girl who had lived in their house became a sacred mission to fulfill the dying wish of a child who had sacrificed her own time to save others. Dr. Chen arrived the next morning with a team of graduate students and enough equipment to conduct a comprehensive analysis of Emma's final prototype. The basement laboratory, which had remained Emma's secret for 30 years, suddenly bustled with the focused energy of scientists who recognized they were in the presence of something extraordinary. "I've been awake all night thinking about this," Dr. Chen told Jace as her students set up testing apparatus around Emma's water purification system. "If Emma's invention performs as well as her documentation suggests, we're not just looking at a clever device, we're looking at technology that could legitimately save millions of lives." The testing process took 3 days. Emma's prototype was subjected to every challenge that Dr. Chen's team could devise. They fed it water contaminated with bacteria, viruses, heavy metals, and chemical pollutants. They tested its efficiency under different weather conditions, with varying levels of sunlight, and with the kind of field conditions it would encounter in developing nations. Emma's invention passed every test. "The purification rate exceeds anything currently available," Dr. Chen announced as she reviewed the final results. "The energy efficiency is revolutionary. The manufacturing cost projections are accurate. Emma didn't just design a water purifier, she solved problems that major corporations have spent billions of dollars trying to address." But more than the technical specifications, it was Emma's thoughtful design choices that impressed the professional engineers. She had anticipated every challenge that users in remote locations might encounter, creating solutions for maintenance, repair, and replacement that could be handled by people with no technical training. She designed this for love, one of Dr. Chen's graduate students observed. Every component reflects an understanding not just of engineering principles, but of human needs. She thought about the mothers who would use this device, the children who would drink the water it produced, the communities that would benefit from its presence. With the testing complete, the next step was to approach organizations that could bring Emma's invention to the world. Martha had compiled a list of foundations, NGOs, and companies that specialized in clean water initiatives. Dr. Chen had reached out to colleagues at other universities who might provide additional validation and support. The response was immediate and overwhelming. The Gates Foundation requested a full technical briefing. UNICEF wanted to discuss pilot programs in 3 African nations. The World Health Organization asked for detailed manufacturing specifications. Companies that specialized in humanitarian technology began competing for the opportunity to license Emma's design. "We need to be very careful about how we handle this," Martha warned during one of their evening planning sessions in Emma's room. Emma's invention could be worth millions of dollars in patent licensing fees. We need to make sure that any money generated goes toward the purposes Emma intended. Jace had been thinking about this constantly. The financial implications of Emma's invention were staggering not just for humanitarian organizations, but potentially for his own family. The patent licensing fees alone could provide financial security for Ollie's entire education and future. But every time he considered the money, he remembered Emma's video message and her letters to her future self. Emma hadn't invented the water purifier to create wealth. She had invented it to save children's lives. Any financial gain had to serve that primary purpose. "I think we need to establish a foundation," Jace announced. "Something that ensures Emma gets full credit for her invention, that directs any profits toward clean water initiatives, and that continues her work of supporting young inventors who want to help others." Ollie, who had been quietly drawing in one of Emma's sketchbooks, looked up with an idea that would prove to be the key to everything. "What if we make a video like Emma did?" he suggested. "What if we tell people Emma's story so they understand that the water purifier isn't just a machine eats, a gift from a kid who cared more about helping others than about living longer herself?" The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. Emma's story was as powerful as her invention, and together they created a narrative that could inspire support for clean water initiatives worldwide. Martha contacted a local television producer who specialized in human interest stories. When the producer heard Emma's story and saw her laboratory, she immediately understood that this was more than just a news story. It was the kind of narrative that could change the way people thought about childhood, illness, and the power of love to transcend death. The filming took place over a week, with careful attention to preserving the dignity of Emma's memory while sharing the full scope of her extraordinary life. They interviewed Dr. Chen about the technical innovations Emma had achieved. They spoke with representatives from humanitarian organizations about the global need for affordable water purification technology. They filmed Ollie and Jace in Emma's laboratory, surrounded by the inventions she had created while fighting for her life. But the most powerful moment came when they played Emma's own video message, letting her speak for herself about her motivations and her hopes for the future. "This isn't just about technology," the producer said as she reviewed the footage. "This is about the triumph of love over despair, about a child who chose to spend her final months creating rather than complaining, about the way extraordinary courage can emerge from ordinary-looking people." As the documentary neared completion, Jace realized that his family had been transformed by their connection to Emma's story. Ollie had found his voice and his purpose, channeling his grief over losing his mother into determination to honor Emma's memory. Martha had discovered a new chapter of meaning in her retirement, becoming the guardian of Emma's legacy and an advocate for young inventors everywhere. And Jace himself had learned that healing sometimes comes not from forgetting loss, but from transforming it into service to others. The night before the documentary was scheduled to air nationally, they held a private screening in Emma's living room. As they watched Emma's story unfold on screen, as they heard her own words explaining her inventions and her dreams, they understood that they had become part of something far larger than their own survival. She knew, Ollie said quietly as the documentary ended. Emma knew that someday people would understand what she was trying to do. Martha nodded, wiping away tears she had shed many times over the past months. She also knew that the right people would find her work and carry it forward. She trusted in the future even when she couldn't be part of it. Jace looked around the room where Emma had lived and dreamed and worked, where she had chosen love over self-pity and service over despair. Tomorrow, her story would reach millions of people. Her invention would begin its journey to the children who needed it most. Her example would inspire other young people to believe that age is no barrier to making a difference in the world. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of the house that had saved them all, three people who had started as strangers sat together as family, united by the legacy of a girl who had believed that love could survive even when the person who felt it could not. Outside, the winter wind rattled the windows, but inside, Emma's spirit filled every corner with the warmth of a life lived in service to others, a gift that would keep giving long after the giver had been called home. The documentary aired on a Tuesday evening in February, exactly 4 months after Jace and Ollie had first walked through the doors of 1247 Sycamore Street. What happened next exceeded every expectation they had dared to form. Within hours of the broadcast, the phone calls began. Not just from journalists and television producers, but from engineers who wanted to help manufacture Emma's invention, from humanitarian organizations ready to fund pilot programs, and from families whose own children had been inspired by Emma's example. Dr. Chen called at midnight, her voice trembling with excitement. "Jace, you need to know what's happening. I've been in touch with colleagues around the world, and the response to Emma's invention is unprecedented. The World Health Organization wants to fast-track approval for field testing. 3 major manufacturing companies are competing to produce the units at cost. The Gates Foundation is talking about funding 1 million units for immediate deployment." But it was Martha who delivered the news that changed everything. "The patent office called," she announced the next morning, her hands shaking as she held the phone. "Emma's patent application has been expedited for approval. Once it's finalized, every water purification unit manufactured using her design will bear her name and generate licensing fees for the foundation we're establishing. The Emma Hartwell Foundation, as they had decided to call it, would receive funding not just from patent licensing, but from donations inspired by Emma's story." Within a week of the documentary's airing, contributions had exceeded $50,000 from viewers who wanted to support clean water initiatives in Emma's memory. Ollie had become the unofficial spokesperson for Emma's legacy, his natural eloquence and genuine emotion making him the perfect ambassador for her story. When reporters asked him what Emma would think about the response to her invention, his answer always brought tears to everyone's eyes. "I think she would be happy that people understand why she worked so hard," he would say. "She didn't want to be famous, just wanted kids to have clean water. Now they will, because of what she invented when she was just 12 years old." The technical validation came from sources that carried weight throughout the scientific community. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology requested Emma's original prototypes for permanent display in their Museum of Innovation. The Smithsonian wanted to create an exhibit about child inventors, with Emma's story as the centerpiece. Most importantly, field tests began in 3 locations where clean water access was critically needed. Engineers traveled to rural villages in Kenya, Guatemala, and Bangladesh, carrying Emma's water purification units and the hope that her invention would perform in real-world conditions as brilliantly as it had in laboratory testing. The results exceeded every projection Emma had made in her notebooks. "The units are working perfectly," reported Dr. Sarah Kim, the engineer overseeing the Kenya deployment. "Local families can operate them with minimal training." The maintenance requirements are exactly what Emma projected. Most importantly, the water quality tests show purification levels that exceed international standards. But it was the human impact that truly validated Emma's vision. In Guatemala, a village that had lost 3 children to waterborne illness in the previous year reported 0 cases of water-related sickness in the 2 months following deployment of Emma's system. In Bangladesh, a school that had been forced to close regularly due to contaminated water supplies was able to maintain full attendance for the first time in years. The photographs that came back from the field deployments showed something that even Emma's extensive planning hadn't fully anticipated. The units weren't just providing clean water, they were bringing communities together. Families gathered around the purification systems, children helped with maintenance, and the devices became focal points for community pride and cooperation. Emma designed more than a machine, observed Dr. Chen as she studied reports from all 3 deployment sites. She designed a tool for community building. The units required just enough cooperation and maintenance to give people ownership over their clean water supply without being so complex that they become burdensome. The patent approval came through on a Friday afternoon in March, exactly 6 months after Jace had bought the house for $800. Martha called from the courthouse where she had been monitoring the paperwork, her voice filled with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished. "It's official," she announced. "Emma Catherine Hartwell is now the youngest person ever to receive a posthumous patent for a humanitarian technology invention. Every unit manufactured will bear her name, and the licensing fees will fund clean water projects worldwide through the Emma Hartwell Foundation." That evening, as they celebrated in Emma's preserved dining room, Jace realized that his family had been transformed by their connection to her story. Ollie had found his voice and his purpose, speaking about Emma's work with the passion of someone who understood that age is no barrier to making a difference. Martha had discovered a new chapter of meaning in her life, becoming an advocate for young inventors and the guardian of Emma's legacy. And Jace himself had learned that healing comes not from forgetting loss, but from transforming it into service to others. Sarah's death had broken his heart, but Emma's example had shown him how to use that brokenness to understand the suffering of others and work to alleviate it. The financial projections for the Emma Hartwell Foundation were staggering. Conservative estimates suggested that patent licensing fees alone would generate over $2 million annually, with deployment funding from major humanitarian organizations potentially reaching 10 times that amount. But more than the money, it was the knowledge that Emma's invention would save lives that filled their house with a sense of completion. Somewhere in the world, children were drinking clean water because of the work a 12-year-old girl had done while fighting for her own life. Parents would not lose their children to preventable illnesses because Emma had chosen to spend her final months inventing rather than grieving. As they prepared for bed that night, Ollie asked the question that had been haunting all of them since the patent approval. "Do you think Emma knows?" he asked. "Do you think she knows that her invention is helping kids?" Jace looked around the dining room, where Emma had once sat doing homework that would change the world, where her parents had watched their brilliant daughter work with the intensity of someone who knew time was running out. "I think Emma always knew," he replied. "I think she knew that love finds a way to survive, even when the person who felt it cannot." The ceremony took place on a warm Saturday morning in May, exactly 1 year after Jace and Ollie had first walked through Emma's front door. The town of Millbrook had chosen to honor Emma's legacy with a memorial plaque in the town square. But what had started as a simple dedication had grown into something far more significant. Over 300 people gathered in the square that morning, not just local residents, but representatives from humanitarian organizations, scientists who had studied Emma's work, families whose children had benefited from her invention, and young inventors who had been inspired by her example. The bronze plaque, mounted on a granite stone near the town's old fountain, bore Emma's photograph and an inscription that captured the essence of her extraordinary life. Emma Catherine Hartwell, 1980. 1993. child inventor, and humanitarian. Her water purification system has provided clean drinking water to over 100 children worldwide. She believed that love could survive even when the person who felt it could not. Her example proves that age is no barrier to changing the world. But it was the speeches that day that truly honored Emma's memory. Dr. Chen spoke about the technical brilliance of Emma's inventions, explaining to the crowd how a 12-year-old girl had solved engineering problems that had challenged professionals for decades. Martha shared stories about Emma's regular visits to the library, her insatiable curiosity, and her determination to use her intelligence in service of others. Representatives from UNICEF and the World Health Organization provided updates on the global deployment of Emma's water purification systems. In the year since the documentary had aired, over 10 units had been manufactured and distributed to communities in 37 countries. The technology that Emma had perfected in her basement laboratory was now saving lives on 6 continents. But it was Ollie's speech that brought tears to every eye in the crowd. "A year ago, my dad and I had lost everything," he began, his voice clear and confident despite his young age. "We were sleeping in our car, and I thought our lives were over. Then we found Emma's house, and we found Emma's story, and we learned something important. Sometimes when you think you've lost everything, you're actually in the exact right place to find what you're supposed to do with your life." Ollie continued, speaking directly to the children in the audience. "Emma was only 12 when she invented something that's now helping kids all over the world have clean water. She was sick, and she knew she didn't have very long to live, but instead of feeling sorry for herself, she spent her time trying to help other people. That's the most grown-up thing anyone can do, no matter how old they are." He concluded with words that would be quoted in newspapers and remembered long after the ceremony ended. "Emma taught us that you don't have to be big to make a big difference. You don't have to be old to do important work. You just have to care about other people more than you care about yourself. If a sick 12-year-old girl could change the world, then any of us can." After the formal ceremony, people lingered in the square, sharing stories about Emma's impact on their lives. Parents spoke about children who had been inspired to pursue science after hearing Emma's story. Teachers described students who had started their own invention projects, determined to follow Emma's example of using their talents to help others. But perhaps the most moving moment came when a family from Kenya approached Jace and Ollie with a photograph. It showed their 8-year-old daughter standing beside one of Emma's water purification units, holding a glass of clean water and smiling with the joy of a child who understood she was safe. "This is our daughter, Amara," the father explained through tears. 2 years ago, she almost died from drinking contaminated water. Now, because of Emma's invention, she is healthy and strong. We wanted you to know that Emma's love reached our family, even though our daughter will never meet the girl who saved her life." The photograph joined the collection that had been growing on Emma's bedroom wall images sent from around the world by families whose children had benefited from her invention. Each photograph represented lives saved, communities strengthened, and hope restored in places where clean water had once seemed impossible to obtain. That evening, as the crowds dispersed and Millbrook returned to its usual quiet rhythm, Jace, Ollie, and Martha sat in Emma's living room, surrounded by letters and photographs from people whose lives had been touched by her legacy. "Do you think we did right by her?" Jace asked, voicing the question that had haunted him throughout their journey. "Do you think Emma would be proud of what we've accomplished?" Martha, who had become the keeper of Emma's memory and the guardian of her values, smiled with the confidence of someone who had known Emma personally and understood her heart. "Emma never wanted to be famous," she replied. "She wanted to help children. Today, over 100 children have access to clean water because of her invention. Thousands more have been inspired to use their own talents to help others. Emma's love has reached further than she ever could have imagined." Ollie, who had grown from a quiet, grieving boy into a confident young advocate for humanitarian innovation, added his own perspective. "I think Emma would be happiest knowing that her story is helping other kids believe they can make a difference. Every time someone hears about what she did and decides to help someone else, Emma's love keeps growing. As night fell over the house at 1247 Sycamore Street, the three people who had been brought together by Emma's legacy reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with an $800 gamble and led to a global movement inspired by a 12-year-old girl's determination to help others. The memorial plaque in the town square would weather and fade over the decades, but Emma's true monument was built from something more enduring than bronze or granite. It was constructed from the lives she had saved, the communities she had strengthened, and the hearts she had touched with her example of selfless love. Her invention would continue working in villages around the world, long after everyone who remembered her personally had passed away. But more than that, her story would continue inspiring young people to believe that age is no barrier to changing the world, that love is stronger than death, and that the greatest gift anyone can give is the decision to use their talents in service of others. In the end, Emma Hartwell had achieved the immortality that every parent hopes for their child, not the immortality of fame or fortune, but the immortality that comes from making the world a better place for those who come after us. 2 years later, on a crisp autumn morning that reminded Jace of the day he'd first bought the house, he stood in Emma's former laboratory, watching his son put the finishing touches on his latest invention. The basement that had once held Emma's secret work now served as headquarters for the Emma Hartwell Foundation's Young Inventors Program, where children from around the world came to develop their own solutions to humanitarian problems. Ollie, now 12 the same age Emma had been when she'd perfected her water purification system, was working on a device he'd designed to help children with mobility challenges navigate rough terrain in developing countries. His invention combined Emma's elegant engineering principles with his own understanding of what it meant to need help when the world seemed determined to knock you down. "Dad, look at this," Ollie called out, his voice filled with the excitement that Jace had learned to associate with breakthrough moments. "I figured out how to make the wheels adapt automatically to different surfaces. It's based on something Emma wrote about in her notebooks, the idea that the best inventions anticipate problems before they happen." Jace smiled, watching his son work with the same focused intensity that Emma had shown in her final months. But unlike Emma, Ollie had time to experiment, time to fail and try again, time to collaborate with other young inventors who shared his commitment to using intelligence in service of others. The house at 1247 Sycamore Street had been transformed while preserving everything that made it sacred. Emma's bedroom remained exactly as she had left it, but the rest of the house had become a living memorial to her vision. The dining room served as a conference space where humanitarian organizations planned deployment strategies for new inventions. The living room hosted visiting families whose children had benefited from Emma's water purification systems and wanted to thank her memory in person. Martha, now officially the Foundation's Director of Youth Programs, had moved into the house to help manage the constant stream of visitors, volunteers, and young inventors who came to study Emma's work and develop their own projects. At 78, she had found a second career that fulfilled her in ways that 42 years of library work had never quite achieved. "We received the quarterly report from the field deployments," Martha announced as she entered the laboratory with a stack of photographs and letters. Emma's water purification systems are now operating in 63 countries. The latest count shows over 300 people with access to clean water because of her invention. But the numbers, impressive as they were, told only part of Emma's story. The letters that arrived daily at the Foundation painted a more complete picture of her legacy's impact. Parents wrote to thank Emma for saving their children's lives. Teachers described students inspired by her example to pursue careers in science and engineering. Young inventors shared their own projects, always crediting Emma's story with teaching them that age was no barrier to making a difference. One letter had particularly moved everyone at the Foundation. It came from a 15-year-old girl in Bangladesh whose village had received one of Emma's water purification units 3 years earlier. "Dear Emma," the letter began, "I know you died a long time ago, but I wanted to tell you that your invention saved my little brother's life. Before your water cleaner came to our village, many children got sick from dirty water. My brother almost died when he was only 4 years old." The letter continued, "Now I am studying engineering so I can invent things like you did. My teacher says I am good at solving problems, and I want to use that gift to help other children the way you helped my brother. Thank you for showing me that girls can be inventors, and that the best reason to be smart is to help other people." Stories like these arrived weekly, each one a testament to the ripple effects of Emma's choice to spend her final months creating rather than grieving. Her water purification systems had not only saved lives, they had inspired a generation of young people to believe that they could change the world through innovation and compassion. The Emma Hartwell Foundation had grown beyond anyone's expectations. The patent licensing fees, combined with donations from around the world, now funded clean water projects, youth inventor programs, and educational initiatives in over 40 countries. Major corporations competed for the opportunity to manufacture products using Emma's designs, with all profits directed toward humanitarian purposes. But perhaps the Foundation's most important work was its annual Young Inventors Fair, held each year in Millbrook on the anniversary of Emma's death. Children from around the world gathered to present their own inventions designed to help others, following Emma's example of using intelligence and creativity in service of humanitarian goals. This year's fair had attracted over 200 young inventors, ranging in age from 8 to 18. Their projects addressed problems Emma would have understood: devices to help children with disabilities, systems to provide clean water in remote locations, technologies to improve education in underserved communities. Jace walked through the fair each year with a mixture of pride and amazement, watching children who had never heard of Emma until they learned about the Foundation, carrying forward her vision with their own innovations. These young inventors didn't just admire Emma's technical brilliance, they had internalized her understanding that the greatest inventions are born from love for people you may never meet. As evening approached on this anniversary day, Jace and Ollie made their way to Emma's bedroom for their annual tradition of reading her letters and looking through the photographs that had accumulated over the years. The room remained exactly as Emma had left it, but it no longer felt like a shrine to interrupted dreams. Instead, it felt like the beginning of a story that was still being written by every child whose life had been saved by her invention, and every young person inspired by her example. "Dad," Ollie said as they settled onto the floor beside Emma's preserved desk, "do you think Emma knew that her story would inspire so many other kids to become inventors?" Jace considered the question, thinking about the girl who had hidden her work so carefully, who had written letters to a future she wouldn't see, who had trusted that someday the right people would find her laboratory and understand its significance. "I think Emma knew that love finds a way to multiply," he replied. "She couldn't have predicted exactly how her story would unfold, but she trusted that caring about others creates more caring, that one person's choice to help can inspire countless others to help as well." As they prepared for bed, Jace reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 years earlier, he and Ollie had been desperate, homeless, and convinced that their lives had been destroyed by loss. Now they lived in a house filled with purpose, surrounded by a global community united by Emma's example, working each day to ensure that her legacy continued growing. The Emma Hartwell Foundation's work would continue long after Jace and Ollie were gone. Emma's water purification systems would keep providing clean water for generations. Her story would keep inspiring young people to believe that they could change the world. Her example would keep proving that love is stronger than death, that the greatest gifts come from the decision to serve others, and that even the briefest lives can cast shadows that stretch across decades. Outside, the autumn wind moved through the trees that surrounded 1247 Sycamore Street, carrying with it the laughter of children who had gathered to honor a girl they had never met, but whose love had reached them across time and space. Inside, a father and son, who had been saved by Emma's legacy, prepared for sleep in the house that had taught them the most important lesson of all. Sometimes when you think you've lost everything, you're actually in exactly the right place to find what you're supposed to do with the rest of your life. Emma's music box played its coded melody one more time before Jace closed the lid, its secret message now shared with the world, but its promise still unfolding in ways that would have amazed even the brilliant girl who had composed it. Her love had survived, just as she had trusted it would, growing stronger with each life it touched and each heart it inspired to care about others. The house settled into peaceful quiet, but Emma's work continued in laboratories and villages around the world, carried forward by people who understood that the greatest inventions are not just clever solutions to technical problems, but expressions of love for humanity itself.